It's called Dear Friends. I've had friends and have them now. Never once did I believe that in my lifetime the word friend would have a new, different, other meaning. I knew language evolved and changed over time. I knew there were new words every year to accommodate its growth, and that some words changed meaning. But love, death, flowers, fire, friend. Then one day I picked up a magazine and read an interview with the COO of Facebook. Perhaps she still is, I don't know. She was asked how many friends she had, and she said, over 3,000. I don't know all of them, but I've met them in one shape or form. I would rather be antiquated. I would rather die than make a statement like that. I know my friends. I know the sound of their voices, their speech patterns, their inflections, their hand and body gestures, the wet of their eyes, what makes them laugh, what makes them cry, how their nose was broken and how they became beautiful after that, and mysterious. So mysterious I cannot reconstitute them even as I try, because they are people. They walk on this earth and they will die here. As Frances Burnett wrote, there are only a few times in life when we think we are going to live forever. I think one of them is when we are with our friends, laughing, eating, looking each other in the eye. I would rather write about friends than relations. Relations, parents, children, siblings, spouses, exist within a grid of social conceptions and expectations that have evolved over centuries. Though we may fail in these relations, though we may let the preconceived down, nowhere in these relations do I find the sheer, unexpected variety that friendship offers. For no two friendships are based on the same thing. The bond between two friends has no other explanation other than itself. I have a friend who has never read a single word I've ever written. I love being with her. I have a friend who is not a person I could ever be, even if I tried, nor would I want to be, but I love being with her. I had a friend who loved apple trees and apple blossoms and apple orchards. He loved swimming in ponds and lakes and making currant jam and jam from mulberries and playing the harmonica. When he read, for he loved books, he read heavy German tomes. He was diagnosed with cancer, and the treatment for his cancer caused a stroke that caused his blindness. He was blind at the end. I took him swimming in a lake. I held his hand, helped him wade out until the water was waist high, and I said that I would be his beacon. I would not move. And he swam, not far, not much, but he went under and came up, utterly refreshed. All the while, I stood there with my arms outstretched and thought, look at me, look at me. I'm helping a blind man swim. And when my friend died, I actually felt lucky, because my last words to him were, I love you. And his last words to me were, I love you. And I thought that it didn't get any luckier than that. Of course, it could have been luckier. He could have lived with his sight for the last few years of his life. He could have seen his apple trees and gone swimming without my help. I had a friend in high school. I had a crush on him. He was gay, but I didn't know it. I had other friends who were gay. My favorite teachers were gay, but I didn't know it. I found out years later. My friend told me all about it, and I was shocked. We were in our 30s then. He was dying of AIDS. I mean, he had AIDS and knew he would probably die. Was not certain. He didn't want to die. He did come to see me twice in what turned out to be the last year of his life. We sat in a diner in the middle of Michigan, and he told me all this stuff that was going on in high school, and I had been completely unaware of. None of the gay guys in high school had come out. He talked about that, about how he knew I had a crush on him, but he couldn't bring himself to tell me he was gay. We actually laughed about it. We were in our 30s and considered ourselves grown-ups, adults. Later I found out that I was not grown up at 30. He never found out. He died before he could find out he wasn't a grown-up. Sitting in the diner, I said to him, I'm so sorry. And he said, why, because I'm gay? I said, no, not that. Because you're going to die. He said, I don't want to die, but you know, these things happen. These things happen. I think in that moment I must have grown up. But later I lapsed into childhood again, and it was another 30 years before I remembered his words. These things happen. By then I'd lost countless friends and family members. By then his words seemed the simplest statement of the truth I had ever heard. After the diner, he wanted to take a strenuous hike through the dunes of Lake Michigan. He'd had chemo and was weak, but was determined to try this one thing while he still had the chance, to see if he could. He barely made it. He would stop every few yards so he could rest. He would not give up or turn back. When we reached the shore of the lake, he opened his fly and pissed right into the water. He had a huge grin on his face. He took off his baseball cap. He was bald beneath it, waved it in the air like he was riding a bronco in a rodeo. His lover was at the opera when he died, and his mother called me to tell me her son was gone. I'd never met her, and she said to me, "He talked about you a lot in high school, and at the end. I never understood. What was the nature of your relationship?" I could tell this was awkward for her. In her grief, she wanted to know everything she could about her son's life, and wondered if he had had sexual relations with women as well as men. I told her the truth. I said, "Your son was my friend. We were always friends. He was a friend of mine, and I was very lucky." I have a friend who believes that birds have souls, but humans do not. This may sound like the belief of a misanthrope, but my friend is anything but that. She's unfaltering in her cheerfulness and kindness. She plays ping pong and badminton with relish. Though she has suffered the blows and disappointments of life like the rest of us, they've never laid a mantle on her shoulders. I've often wondered if her explication of souls is connected to her sense of contentment, if it's the secret key to a disposition we could all use. I've known her for most of my life, and she remains a mystery. Birds. Little brown birds. I had a friend in high school with whom I felt a deep bond. We were both interested in religion and philosophy. In college, she went the way of the Greek classics, and by a turn in the road became a Buddhist. I went the way of English literature, and by a turn in the road became a poet with a Zen approach to writing, who used the word God in every third poem. When we were teenagers, we shared the belief that we were human beings on a spiritual journey. By the time we were 50, we both pretty much knew we were spiritual beings on a human journey. We expressed this belief by exchanging Christmas cards every December. We didn't see one another in all that time. And one year I happened to be teaching near her, and we managed to spend a day together. We were both divorced and living alone by then. Of course, we had lunch in a nifty restaurant. She was a vegetarian, I was not. But the rest of the afternoon we spent in the old swimming pool behind my crumbling apartment complex. And what did we do in the swimming pool? Not swim. We stood waist deep in the water and saved the lives of hundreds of drowning wasps, picking them one by one out of the water while we lazily talked, without either of us mentioning the wasps and what we were doing for them. For 3 hours we stood there and had a rhythm going, wasp up, wasp out. I can't remember any of our chat. I only remember the wasps in a pile on the side of the pool, coming to realize in their squirming that they were still alive. Most of them crawled right back into the pool, and we saved their lives twice. It was lovely to see my old friend again. That afternoon we didn't quite act like human friends. We acted like reincarnated lotus buds who, if they wanted to float, had to clear the pond of debris, which amounted to a good deed. I have a friend whom I have never met. I'm pretty sure we will meet next year. One of the friends I've written about here has died since writing this. I have a friend I met once and only briefly, and we have corresponded ever since. In the beginning, we wrote long letters using words, but for some years now we have not. Now we exchange by mail flowering branches, birds' nests, tiny gloves, feather hats. Once she sent me the entire sweepings from her porch, shards of blue clapboard paint mixed with dirt, leaves, and debris. Beauty by accident, as so many friendships are. I have a friend who wishes that she were not a human animal, but an animal with fur. A cat, fox, dog, or rabbit. This disturbs me so much, I love her even more. I have a friend I've known for 45 years. She's the purest poet I know. She has not written a poem since she was 20. Instead, she has chosen, day after day, to wear only blue or gray. I consider this an ingenious, even perfect solution to the problem of poetry and time. I had a friend for 25 years, and the earth opened between us. Now we have not spoken in 25 years, but nearly every week I dream of her, so there is this sense, for me at least, that we still know and love each other, only late at night, behind closed eyes. I had a friend who had a very sad time in my life, was more or less my only friend. She was sad too, and she was a dog. She was not my dog. I'd never had a dog. I knew nothing about dogs. I'd heard they were man's best friend, but thought that was sentimental and without weight. My friend belonged to a very young couple, too young to be a couple, in my opinion, who lived in the apartment below mine. They fought all the time, especially at night. They screamed and hollered at each other and sounded a lot like an old married couple who fought, which is why I thought they were way too young to live like that. My friend, the dog, used to visit me when her parents, masters, owners, fought. I would hear her scratching at my door. She couldn't bark because her vocal cords had been removed by her original owner, parent, master. Her hips had been damaged in an accident, and she wore a brace around her hind parts. I could hear her scratching at my door with her front paw. I would let her in, and together we would sit and listen to the fighting coming up through the floor. She would be trembling. I would put my arms around her. We would stay like that for the longest time. I always had food and water for her. She knew right where they were on the floor. And since at that time I myself was eating very little on account of my sadness, I would eat a little something from my cupboard when she ate. So we would eat together and hold each other, and then her master, parent, owner, would holler for her to come down, and she would go. I would hold the door open for her, and she would turn one last time to look at me before she limped down the stairs. She could not bark or whimper or make the least sound. I loved her. One day I put a silly cardboard frame over her head so that it sat on her neck and framed her face, and I took her picture. The whole thing lasted no more than a minute, and today, 30 years later, her portrait still sits by my desk. I know she is dead. I don't know how the last years of her life turned out. One night the couple had an explosive fight. My friend came upstairs to sit with me. In the morning, her mother, owner, master, packed the car and left, taking my friend with her. As I stood in the parking lot, I could not bring myself to say goodbye. I didn't hug her or pet her. I just looked at her and walked inside. If she had anything to say, she couldn't say it, nor could I. I could cry, and that was a blessing. Now, when I think of dogs, I understand that their relationship is very sentimental, carries great and lasting weight. I have a friend, and for several years we were both lost at the same time, at loose ends, adrift. He lived on the West Coast, and I lived on the East Coast, and many nights we talked for hours on the phone, keeping each other company. Even the long silences were comfortable between us. Some of the things we said to each other were so strange I began writing them down. Writing things down was everything to me, and it was everything to him. Someone who knew us well said we could complete each other's sentences, and that was true, too. He would say, "I can't talk to people who don't know what they're doing." When it was clear, neither of us knew what we were doing. Once he said, "I'm so slow," and I said, "I know. You have a head of butter and a body of water," which he pretty much does. Another time he said, "Al is so much smarter than I am." No, not smarter, but he has a wife. And we would crack up, and the minutes flew. Suddenly he would exclaim, "Look at this, a helicopter!" What would Kafka say? He was always reporting on things happening outside his window. Once he saw a mountain lion. While out my window I saw only squirrels. A dear friend of his died, and his wistful comment was, "I'm completely unable to make myself stutter." He was that smooth, butter and water. Then he lost another friend, suddenly and unexpectedly, and he said, "No one knows what to say. That's why poetry exists." I was contemplating getting an aquarium, a large one, and his reaction was, "You have to have a sense of irony to buy a gigantic aquarium in the first place, but only once you start sitting in front of it and staring, you've lost your sense of irony." We would always talk about what we were having or just had for dinner. I'd say, "I just bought a plump little hand-fed, hand-raised chicken. Isn't that sad?" And he'd respond, "I don't want to upset you because you've already upset yourself, but all I ate today was cardboard." Another conversation went like this. "Sorry, I'm just me these days." "That's your problem. You're just you, so snap out of it." I would hear his doorbell ring in the background, and he would say, "That's my dry cleaning being delivered." To me, that was insanely indulgent, but he would remind me that his family were immigrants and say, "We didn't come to this country to change light bulbs." And it was just banter. I'd remind him that they came to this country because we have light bulbs. It was just banter, completely idle, and we loved it. We could say anything to each other. That's one of the great gifts of friendship. We shared a wavelength. We still do. Though our lives are no longer adrift, and we don't talk nearly so often, the sound of his voice is as familiar to me as air. We often spoke out of the blue without any context. Once he said something totally unexpected. He said, "Women are incredible." I just wanted to say that in case any women are listening. I have a friend who's the best read human being I've ever known. Not only has he read everything you've ever heard of, read, or hope to read, he's read novels like The Mysteries of Udolpho and Penguin Island. He's read Lorna Doone. He has read The Exegesis of Philip K. Dick. His idol is David Hume, and although he's completely indifferent toward Shakespeare, my friend is also the sanest person I know. Eccentric and sane, a dynamo combination. He has a beautiful, compassionate wife whom he adores, 2 beautiful grown children whom he adores. He lives in a modest house that is one of the warmest and most welcoming I've ever been in. There's special places in it, the basement, where he has a grotto, his refuge, his private sanctuary. This room is cold and damp and covered floor to ceiling with shelves holding his collections, which include 100 porcelain figurines on whose faces unusual expressions have been caught, framed photographs of forgotten movie stars, 100 odd ashtrays, 1,000 tiny matchbooks, and everything in between. It resembles an antique store of the particular kind that a fetish-minded customer would buy out on the spot. A foreign film crew even wanted to film it, but my friend declined. This is where he keeps his books and his postcards, of which he has over 20,000, found in metal filing cabinets. In middle age, he suffered the proverbial collapse, after which he became a serious student of Buddhism, meditating daily in his grotto. He was born a Jew, the son of Holocaust survivors, who so traumatized his development that their level of control and his level of guilt constantly collided. His mother would not allow him to wear worn, frayed jeans in high school because she didn't survive for her son to wear rags. Eventually he became not a misanthrope, but a slightly misanthropic man, having learned early on through books and life inhumanity is an ongoing reality. If history teaches, it has no pupils. My friend is sitting in that otherwise empty classroom. Yet over the years, his wife and family, his music, his dog, have brought him such genuine solace and love that he considers himself a fortunate man. One day I said to him his whole philosophy could be summed up in a sentence. Life is terrible, terrible. I am a fortunate man. He laughed with acknowledgement. But sometime later it dawned on me that my friend, who has spent his whole life escaping the clutch of his parents, has finally come to a summation that was in effect theirs. For they had drummed into him since he first gasped for air that life was terrible and he was fortunate, which is my philosophy entirely. For life is terrible, and I am fortunate to have such a friend who keeps me ever aware and in check, as on the day he said to me from out of the blue, "Oh, are you so cozy in your life you can turn down a red-flocked bare ashtray?" I have a friend who died, yet every time I think of him I smile and am never sad. How can you not smile when you recall a man who, given the choice, would only eat white food? His favorite meal, which he often served to guests, was boiled spaghetti with cheese sprinkled on top, cheese you shook from a can, and for dessert, a boxed Boston cream pie with the chocolate glaze diligently scraped off. A man who was such a romantic, his idea of a pickup line was, "You have all the colors of October in your hair. Come and have a donut in my car." He also dumped a bucket of sand on the floor of his car so he could take the beach with him wherever he went. A masterful writer who had published to acclaim but fell out with the Times and in his dotage announced with glee that a few paragraphs were appearing in Yankee magazine. Someone who recited Shelley and Keats in the middle of a conversation about pudding. A man who was determined to tap a maple tree for syrup, and upon tapping the lone spindly tree in his front yard, announced with pride that a cup of sap had produced a teaspoon of syrup, which he gave as a gift to his neighbor's dog. The last time I saw my friend was the night of a full moon. He desired us to view it from the end of a pier, so dangerously dilapidated it had been cordoned off by a chain and an ordnance. He drove as far as the chain, got out of his car, unhitched the chain, and drove us to the end of the pier, where we parked and sat in silence as the moon rose over the ocean. Finally, he turned to me and said, "They can't keep the moon out." I have a friend I have known since the day she was born. She's not my daughter or my sister, but the daughter of a friend. At least she was the daughter of my friend for the first 20 years of her life, before she became my friend. This came as a surprise to me. I'd never considered that someone you know before she could feed herself would one day be having dinner with you holding a fork. If we are at the movies and go to the ladies' room together, I don't think of her as being in diapers, though she was once, and I knew her then. It's a mysterious thing how one person becomes another, and I cherish her friendship as utterly distinct from any others I have. Because she is 35 years younger than I am, in all probability I will die before she reaches her full adulthood, before she is my age. I sometimes feel like a wild duck flying over her head, knowing all the time we have spent together will one day be no more than an occasional vivid memory for her, unlike a parent whom one thinks of constantly. And then I realize that this is true of all friendships. They're wild ducks flying overhead, that my friendship with her is no different than any other, and therefore perfect. I had a friend I'd known for years, but we never lived in the same place at the same time. And then we did. For 6 months, we lived in the same city and had dinner every week on the same night, in the same restaurant, at the same time, at the same table, and ordered the same thing, wild mushrooms and cream sauce, and drank the same wine, sincere. During dinner, he told me the story of his life in increments, dinner by dinner, like a serialized novel. They were wonderful dinners because we were moving from his birth to the present, because the story of a heterosexual stockbroker who becomes a bisexual surrealist poet is a long one. We're always the last to leave the restaurant. Staff came to know us and let us linger at our table while they prepared to close for the night. My friend and I were doing the same work, but because he was paid twice what I was, he insisted on paying and would never let me pick up the bill. He did agree that I could pay for our last dinner, and that on that occasion we would go somewhere new. Because I wanted to repay him in any way I could, I chose an even more expensive restaurant, a Japanese one. It was written up in all the papers. It was terrible. The food was so minimal, we would look at our plates and make up ridiculous poems on the spot, staring at a shred of vegetable floating in water. There are 100 kinds of sake, and we tried a great many of them, giving them titles. Haunted Bell, Chrysanthemum Tragedy, Nightingale Hit by a Fan. As the evening wore on, the names grew increasingly Western and literary until we were drinking Forlorn Incubus and Apropos of Wet Snow. Shared misery can be a joy. I saw my friend once more before he died. We had dinner in a foreign country. We spent that dinner talking about all our other dinners. Dinner with friends. Doesn't get any better than that. You eat dinner with friends, the ones you really love and no other. You've reached a pinnacle you don't see, but it is there. Look around the table. In the still garden, the meal shines for a gathering of friends. If someone starts clearing it, put your hand on their arms ever so lightly, ever so briefly. Pause that plate in midair. I had a friend in high school who was not my best friend, but she lived closest to me in the city. It was easy to walk to her house on the weekends. She lived in a house, and I lived in an apartment. Her family was sophisticated in ways that were new and mysterious to me. Her father, I found out years later, was a CIA agent whose cover was working for the embassy as a cultural attaché with an emphasis in Asian art. Those were the days of Vietnam, as we refer to them now, which sound as peculiar in retrospect as if a fad for straw or silk had swept through the country. My friend's mother came from a wealthy Southern family and had once been a professional ballerina, a fact that deeply impressed me, even as my English teacher, whose class I excelled in, told me I was a klutz, without a single bodily grace belonging to any of the 9 muses. He'd been watching me through a classroom window as I tried in the court below to hit a tennis ball. Later he went so far as to insult my clothing, telling me to my face my dress was ridiculous, and so it was. A brown shift with a huge turquoise polka dots, a Peter Pan collar, and a big floppy bow. My sister had made it. She made all my clothes. We weren't allowed to wear pants to school. My friend's sister took fencing lessons in a white bodysuit. She had a saber and a grilled mask. It was all too much. My friend had several fur coats that were so odd and interesting you couldn't guess what animal they were made from. I joked once that she was wearing her monkey coat. It occurs to me now it probably was a monkey coat, as monkeys can be found in all the Asian countries her father traveled to, supposedly collecting the antique heads of the Buddha. So that was the situation. My mother adored my friend. She liked my friend better than any of my other friends because when meeting my mother for the first time, my friend had curtsied. I think my mother had waited her whole life for that moment. My mother loved fruit. I think she would as soon have married a pear as my father. There was always a big bowl of fruit in the kitchen. Liver-spotted bananas and green grapes translucent as jade. If I ate the grapes, the arthritic stems that remained terrified me. I imagined them as crippled hands coming to get me. There were always apples, her favorite. In those days, there weren't kinds of apples. You couldn't say, I feel like a gala, or pick up some Granny Smiths. There were only, well, apples. They were red, and all shaped the same, and perfectly tasteless. My mother kept another bowl of fruit in the dining room, and all of that fruit was artificial. When I was younger, it was plastic, but by the time I was in high school, it had all turned to bone china. In my mother's mind, there was a very big difference between a plastic orange and an orange made from china. And if you couldn't tell the difference, you had no taste, none at all. It was the difference between a handshake and a curtsy. Years and years later, I wrote a poem, and in the poem are the passing words, a world where no one ever even curtsies anymore. Now, I've noticed through the years that many readers want, even demand, a backstory to anything that is ever written. Now I've given them the entire backstory of these fleeting words. I feel for a moment like my friend who curtsied in front of my mother, something my mother had always wanted and got once. When I walk through a city, I see many strange faces. Though none leave a trace, I know they have friends. Who are their friends? Whose friends are they? For wherever I walk, the image of my friend goes with me. I have a friend who used to be a dancer. She once choreographed and performed a dance I've never forgotten. She danced to Al Green singing "How Can You Mend a Broken Heart?" She was solo on the stage, and a spotlight followed her as she moved. She was wearing a paper bodysuit. As she moved, the paper tore, at first in tiny slits at the seams, then in big gashes, rip after rip, until she was dancing in shreds, practically naked. It was so bold and beautiful and sad. It happened once, and once only. It was something to behold, and then it vanished from the earth.